What's up YouTube, and welcome to another draw along with me, where today we're going to go ahead and create this beach scene. Now, as always, there's links to everything you're going to need in the requirements section of the description down below. There'll be a link where you can grab all of the requirements for today's design. There is an additional brush and there's the palette for today's design. As always, when you're done with today's design, make sure to tag me in your finished creations over on Instagram. Come and share them with the Discord community. It's a wonderful place for you to come and share your work with other active users that share their work daily. And of course, if you want even more tutorials from me, you can come and follow me over on Patreon, where I've been posting 3 exclusive tutorials to my patrons every single month, and the catalogue sits at nearly 100 at the time of recording. So if you want to get access to that exclusive catalogue, hit the link in the description down below. Enjoy today's tutorial, and with all that said, let's get started. So once you've created your canvas, the first thing we're going to go ahead and do is add in a drawing guide. So if we go to our actions, we go to our canvas tab, and we turn on the drawing guide, and of course edit that drawing guide. We're going to change the grid size to whatever is a quarter of your canvas size. So mine is 2000 by 2000, so my grid size should be 500, and we'll hit done. And as always, you can use it to work out scale and positioning against the grid on your screen, looking at the grid on my screen. So we'll go ahead and we'll start to block in a few of our basic shapes. So we're going to go ahead, first of all, we're going to grab a temporary color for the moment, which will actually be this color here, the top of the third column. I'm going to go to my selection tool, and I'm going to go to the option of rectangle. I'm going to tap on color fill until it turns blue, and then I'm going to go ahead and draw in my horizon. And it's just going to be a couple of pixels above this line here. Drag across and tap on your selection tool when you're done. We're then going to want to go ahead and add in our rocky areas here as well. So we'll go ahead, let's go ahead and tap on our background color first of all though, and change it to this color here in the bottom right of the palette and hit done. We're going to go to our layers and we'll create a new layer. We'll go to our colors. We're going to go ahead and grab this color here, the top of the second column there. And your brush wants to be something that you can draw in a solid shape with. And I think calligraphy and the monoline will be perfect. And if we tap on the monoline brush, my stabilization is very low. So I've gone to the stabilization tab there. Streamline and stabilization is quite low, so I can get some nice jitters in my pen, allowing me to get some nice bumpy, rocky kind of shapes if I require them. Now, the first one we're going to go ahead and look at is our main area of sort of stone over here on the left-hand side. And we want to go and create like a big sort of hole in the rocky shape so you can pierce sort of straight through and take a look through the opposite side. And that's roughly going to sort of run against this column here, and it's going to sit on this side over here. So let's start at the very top here, maybe around about sort of a third in. And we're just going to run our pen along here. You can always, of course, adjust the shape afterwards. And we're going to allow that to just run down, and we're going to come down to around about sort of our land here and where our horizon is. And we're just going to create like a bit of a bumpy shape that runs to around about here, just a little bit inwards of our halfway point there. So it just crosses over ever so slightly. And then I think the best sort of thing we can do here is if we go ahead and we kind of draw in across and then draw into roughly around about sort of 2/3 across. So we can draw in to around about 2/3 across. The first thing I think we should do is draw in this rocky side over here. So you can go ahead and go make your way up. You don't want too much overhang of rock, etc. So you kind of just want to sort of run your pen all the way up and create this side over here. Then I think we can go ahead and sort of gauge where we want the rock to be. So roughly up here, I'm going to run a quarter through here, come down, getting gradually wider at the bottom, and then just connect these two together. So I can just run my pen across here, and then I'm going to go ahead just a little bit further back, but still on our brown sort of shape here, just create the shape that's going to run all the way along here like so. Now what we'll do is for a moment we'll drag and drop the color into those spaces to get a sort of idea for the silhouette of our stonework, and then from there you can go ahead and make some adjustments if you want to. You could go ahead and really kind of create a bit more of a angular rock shape in the center there and drag and drop some color in. You could go ahead and create some like intricate details on the very top there if you want to, such as little tiny little bumps and lumps. And take a look at the bottom here. The only thing I want to kind of make sure is we kind of want to point this way a little bit with our water and the stonework. So like pointing our land upwards like this. So what I need to go ahead and do is I need to first of all bring this one down just a tiny bit more and then bring that across. So I'll drag and drop the color into there. So that gives me a little bit more depth now. You can see how this one gets a little bit further back. But I just want to go ahead and just adjust this. I'm drawing in as we speak. I'm going to bring it a little bit closer towards us and then just adjust the land so that it gradually gets further back. So if I drag and drop the color in here now, we have this big rocky area here, and that should hopefully start to push that a little bit further back. You can also go ahead and grab your eraser, set your eraser to the monoline as well, and maybe just trim off the edge there and maybe thin that out a little bit on the end. And then I'm also going to go ahead and just zoom in here. I'm just going to try and make this one a little bit more interesting and maybe create like a sort of peaked system over here on this little area of rock. Bring that down a little bit more. Give some extra height in here. The one thing you kind of want to make sure that you've done here is just covering up your horizon line. If we can cover that up, we can nicely sort of layer our design front to back. So once you've got that in play, we can then also go ahead and work on the right side. Now I am going to go ahead and create a second layer for the right hand side, and we'll swipe from left to right on both of these, and we'll rename them, and we'll just call them Foreground. So they're the closest ones to us, so we'll call it Foreground. We'll go to the new layer that we've created in this group, and over here on the right hand side, roughly around about 2/3 down at the top here, we're going to go ahead and just draw in quite a simple rocky shape that's going to come down quite steep and make its way down towards the water, and then create like a little bit of an extra rocky area here, and then you can just round that off at the bottom like so, and drag and drop your color in. Now taking a look at that, that looks pretty sweet. You could maybe go ahead and make it a little bit more interesting here and raise that up a tiny bit just so that it goes over the horizon line just a smidge. And overall that's looking pretty good, nice and sharp, and I think we'll just maybe sharpen up the corner the tiniest bit. So we've got our rocky formation in play. Let's go ahead and add in the one that's going to sit at the very back as well, so in behind our horizon. So we'll create a new layer and drag it all the way down underneath our brown block that we've got down here. We're going to go ahead and go to our colors, and we're going to grab this color here, the top of the 4th column. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm just going to draw in a line that's going to go through from here. I'm drawing as we speak all the way to a point that I can see. So just a little bit sticking out just here on the end of my pen. That means that I know I've gone from the edge of the canvas over there. And now I can draw in my first shape here. And that's going to roughly, again, be a point that's going to sit somewhat like this. And I know what kind of shape I want to create based off my original practices. So I'm just going to create like a little bit of a ledge here. I'm going to come up into a bit of a point that's going to come down on itself, a little bit of a slope top on it, and then just bring that down like so. So hopefully trying to create something a little bit interesting, but making sure you connect to this point here. That's where we came in from that opposite side. If we go ahead and take a look over here, let's try and maybe think about, can we create some bumps and lumps here and then create another formation where we've got, again, an interesting kind of landscape. Is there anything we can create here that will just look quite fun and interesting to look at? And make sure you go all the way off to the right hand side. Now, if you've connected them together correctly, you should be able to drag and drop the color in here then and start to just refine a few of your shapes. I'm actually going to really get rid of that big cut in there. I'm going to take that down a little bit. I'm going to block that in. And that's looking pretty cool. We've got some interesting formations there in the distance. We can always, of course, grab our eraser and then just chop away into there if we want to, see what kind of other shapes we come up with. And that one looks a little bit closer to this one. So I'm just going to chop off the top there, and then they at least look like they're sister kind of islands in the distance. But just a couple of little bumps and lumps as well will look really nice, making their way off into the distance. So now we've got our sort of background area done. We can now start to go ahead and start to populate this correctly. So we'll go ahead and create a new layer and drag it underneath those hills. We'll go ahead and create then another layer and swipe from left to right and group them together. We'll rename this folder or group, and we'll call it sky. We'll grab the bottom layer out of the two. We're going to go ahead and go to this color here, the middle of the far right column. We're just going to go to our selection tool. We're going to go ahead and use freehand, and we're going to make sure color fill is turned on. And all we're going to do is just create like a bit of a kind of odd shape like this and go all the way around this right side and connect up. So you're basically chopping off the whole of the top left-hand corner there. And then tap on your selection tool when you're done. And then just go to your adjustments and Gaussian blur and swipe from left to right. Really blend that out. So I'm going to go up to something around about 70 to 75% there and tap on my adjustments when I'm done. We'll then go ahead and introduce some of the sun back here. So we'll go to our layers, we'll go to the other layer that we created, and we'll go to our colors. We'll grab the color in the top right of the palette, and we'll grab our brush this time. So we'll go to our brush and airbrushing and the soft brush. We'll make it fairly large, around about sort of 20 to 30%, something that you are happy to control. And in the top right, we're just going to yellow this up and then blend that across a little bit. So we really want to brighten up this sort of right side of our design, showing how lovely of a sunny day it is, and blend across and really overlap some of that blue. So you'll get a bit of a blue to the sort of lighter color, and then this yellow in the top right really does take over the sky. And you can always come back and maybe block that in a little bit. And if you struggle with the soft airbrush, you can just follow the same steps we did a second ago with just drawing in a shape and then blurring it out. Both will give you quite a similar result. Now I'm just trying to blend that across even more. And now we've done that, you can go ahead at this point if you want to and pinch them together. You can save on your layers, but we'll progress on without it. We're going to go to those hills there that we created in the background. And let's go ahead first of all, create a new layer in front of it, group them together. And we'll rename that group and we'll just call it Foreground. We're then going to go ahead and go to the empty layer that we just created and tap on it and clipping mask it to the shape. We'll go to our colors. We're going to grab, first of all, this color here, the middle of the fourth column. Brush still wants to be the soft airbrush. And we're going to go ahead and add in a bit of a gradient here at the bottom of this land. So we're going to go left to right, and I've set the brush size to around about sort of 14-15%. You just want to create like a bit of a nice fade up. So we've got a nice bright color towards the bottom, and it just blends up the rock like so. We're then going to go ahead and add in some details. So we'll create a new layer and tap on it, and we will clipping mask it. We're going to go ahead and change the blend mode from normal to the option of add. And we're going to go to our colors. We're going to grab the bottom color now in the fourth column. And we're going to use our main detail brush for today. So if we go up to our brushes, if we go to artistic, we're going to use this one here, the sassafras brush. Now I've probably butchered it, but either way, it's all good. I'm going to set the opacity of the brush to 64%. The size, we want it quite small to start with. I'm going to see what a maybe around about a 10% will look like to start with. And all we're trying to do, the sunlight's going to be over there on the right hand side. I'm going to pick this one here as a good example. All you want to do is kind of brighten up the right hand side and just create lots of little sort of streaks running down that right hand side. This brush has got some fantastic texture in it. So if you can try and sort of highlight some of the edges that you think would get that lovely bathing sun, you do not have to do a lot of the rock to make this look effective. You can leave it as simple as this and create some really simple colored in shapes. I'll just brighten up on the top of those ones back there, and I'll also add in a little bit on here too at the bottom. And you can introduce little cutaways inside the rock. You know, feel free to bring your brush size down. Let's go down to maybe 6% and just create like an interesting kind of shape. You can create like a little squiggle. It's just an area of rock that's been caught by the lighting that's going to be right up here. And then we just repeat over here. But we can maybe try and factor in a few things. Does this maybe block out some of the sunlight? So, you know, we could, for example, like skip this entire area down here and we could just add it towards the top. It's just a suggestion. We'll see what we come up with. I'm going to go back to the 10% brush size, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to really create like a large area here. So it's going to run down. And all I'm doing is just creating really, really light streaks. If you struggle with your pressure, potentially just drop your opacity even more. But I'm going to go ahead and then brighten that up onto that edge. And again, it doesn't need to be too complex. Something as simple as that just nicely highlights the land in the distance. Let's imagine maybe there's another peak here of some sort of rocky formation. So if we bring the brush size down to say 6%, we can maybe go ahead and sort of introduce like another kind of peak-like shape here on the side that, even though it's just part of the silhouette, maybe it is, again, just like this side, an area that's just sticking up enough that we can go, hang on, there's some light hitting that. We can identify that with a little bit of color. And these simple shapes that just point over there, and we can bring our opacity up to 100%, and we could bring the brush size down to 2%. We could get in here and really sort of, in fact, let's make the brush size a bit bigger than that, maybe about sort of 4% here. Brighten up on the top edge here. So I could just brighten up a little bit on there. I could really get in here and kind of identify a few sort of areas where I can just maybe brighten up a few sort of quite strong, bold areas. You don't need to be too many of them, but just enough that in the odd little spot here and there, you've got some additional sort of levels of highlight. And it's very far back, so you shouldn't sort of think too much sometimes about detailing things that are way in the distance. Now, what we'll then also go ahead and do is we'll go to our layer here for the actual rocky areas. We're going to tap on it and we're going to add a mask to it. Don't worry if you've never used a mask before, it's really easy to use. What it does is it adds this little object here, the mask, to this layer. So this is attached to this. It's all white right now. This is your preview, just like here is of your layer. So the preview of this mask is it's all white. And you'll notice my color's now been changed to black. So what if I go ahead and now change my brush to airbrushing and the soft brush, make my brush size around about sort of 15% and just sort of blend out a few more times. Maybe just give it a light coat all the way up to the top just to fade it a little bit, and then really go over that bottom area to go left to right. I want a little bit of the structure of the shape there, so I'm only going to go to this sort of degree and I'm going to leave it. So with that done, we can then go ahead and move on. So the foreground is actually now done. So if you want to, as just before, you can go ahead and tap on this and you can flatten it. It's totally up to you. And to do that, you just tap on the group and go to flatten, and that'll make it into one layer. Now we're going to go ahead and save our ocean area and beach till the end. So we're going to work on our rock again. So we're going to go up into this foreground group and work on this left-hand side. We're going to create a new layer and tap on it and clip it to that left-hand side formation. And we're going to go to our colors. Going to grab this color here at the top of the third column. Your brush wants to still be soft brush under airbrushing. Going to make that brush size around about 25%. And at the top area here of this rock, we're going to just add in a nice sort of blend of this color. So a good sort of bathing of color on the top edge up here, and just bringing that down this right side a tiny bit. And then potentially, again, just a tiny bit on the end of this little rock over there too. So we've got this very subtle change now in the browns. You might just about be able to see it on camera, but you'll definitely be able to see it in your own work. We're then going to go ahead and add in some details. So let's go ahead and create a new layer and tap on it and clipping mask it. We're going to go ahead and we're going to go to our colors. We're going to grab this color here, the middle of the third column. We're going to go back to our brush and go back to artistic and the sassafras brush. I'm probably butchering it every time. Now for me, I'm probably going to set the size to about sort of 12%, and you may want to sort of fluctuate that depending on how much sort of pressure you want to add on your screen. But I want to go ahead and I'm going to bathe this left side over here with some light coming down the edge predominantly to start with. And then maybe I'll sort of run some very light kind of streaks and breakaways in the stone and run that all the way up to the top. And you can overlap the brush on itself. It's got a lovely texture in there, which will just give it some nice eroded kind of look to it. We are going to add in some further content on top of it, but you don't have to bathe the entire area in lighting, just a little bit on this top area. You can see I've left the bottom area completely empty. Maybe down here I'll go ahead and really light with my pen and then try and press a little bit firmer to create some sort of rocky area down here that's getting some light. We'll run our pen down this edge, create some grooves. Take a look at your formation. Where do you think you could go ahead and sort of add in some cuts in here? And it just needs to be as simple as these like overlapping lines that just create this rock formation. Now, again, as I keep saying, less is always going to be more down here. So we can go ahead and go all the way down here. Don't worry if it goes down here too much. We'll just erase into it in a moment. We'll go ahead and we'll bathe this area in some lighting too. Quite simple principles, just the same as the opposite side over here at the back. You could bring the brush size down if you want to and create some, additional sort of smaller areas of lighting. So potentially I could just bathe this right side and maybe a squiggle or two here just to show some sort of unique formation down there. And it always has to be quite simple. And then what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to go ahead and mask into this a little bit. And before we do that, we're going to go ahead and change the blend mode, first of all, from normal to the option of add. This is going to then work with the colors that we added below. And we're also going to swipe it to the left and duplicate it before we progress on. So I'm going to go ahead with this top one. I want to go ahead and tap on it and add a mask to it again. We're going to make sure we're on the mask and your color is set to black. Go back to your brush and go back to the option of airbrushing and the soft brush. And we want to make sure that our brush size is a good size, maybe around about 17%. And we're going to blend out at the bottom here and fade it up. So we're just splashing that lighting towards the top area of our design only. So we're just taking away a little bit of light from the bottom, giving it a little bit more of a moody look to it, and blend out the bottom here too. And you can then sort of vary up your lighting. It's nice and bright towards the top, and down here it's a little bit darker. Let's then go ahead and go back down to the one below it though that we originally drew. Let's tap on that one and add a mask to that too. Making sure, again, we're on the mask. We are going to go ahead and go to our brush and change it back to artistic and the sassafras. We're going to go ahead, let's bring the opacity down to 64% and the brush size down to 6. We can then start to sort of erode into this a little bit. So let's really light with your pressure, just kind of just chop away. In fact, I'm going to make the brush size a bit bigger. I'm going to go up to 22%. So I can just break into here, take away some of the edges and just get rid of some of that painting look. If you struggle with this brush, for example, just maybe sort of pick something a little bit easier for you, potentially something like the soft airbrush. I can go ahead and just chop away into here, and I'm just trying to sort of create erosion lines in those sort of areas. I'm just breaking down some of these highlights a little bit more, seeing what we can come up with. But as always, make sure to progressively sort of zoom out. Take a look at your design. Don't get lost in them details, as I always say. Back out. Make sure you don't get sort of lost in it too much. And then once you've done enough to the areas that you think you can get away with, such as on the sort of initial add layer, I definitely want to get rid of some of this down here. Go ahead and then switch back up to this layer here for the add additions, because it may still be adding a little bit of light in the areas that you just eroded from. So here I've got rid of quite a lot by erasing from both layers. Up here, for example, there's a lot of bright light here, and if I chop away into here on the back end of some of this color, I can break that down and get rid of some of its sort of vibrancy. I can break down this too. And don't be afraid to be bold, and maybe run your sort of pen straight through it and just create some awesome sort of variation in the stonework. Otherwise, it's just going to look very, very sort of painting-like, which is not a problem. But for today's design, we just want to try and sort of make sure that they don't have too many strokes to them. So we're going to keep jumping backwards and forwards between both masks, for example, and then just trying to take away a little bit off of here. And then make sure if I go back up to the other one, I do the same area back to back. And then eventually you should then start to see a real change in the lighting there. There is just one other area that I could probably take away a bit of color from, and that's just there. Now, before we finish this area, we're going to go ahead and on these masks that we've just been working on, we're going to go ahead and first of all on the top add layer here, the brightest one, if we make sure we're on the mask, and again our color is set to black, if we go to our brush and we go into organic and we grab the Spires brush, if we set the brush size to around about, say, 8% here, you should be able to then run your pen over the top of some of your bright highlights here, and it's just going to erase into them slightly with a bit of an eroded, bumpy kind of texture to them, which should hopefully give these areas here that are right in front of us a bit more sort of texture. And you can rotate your canvas, which will then rotate the pattern on top of the brush. So if you rotate your canvas a little bit, you should get some different angles, maybe some more vertical angles in here. So break that down with a little bit of a run over of this brush. And then go ahead and do the same on the layer underneath. So this other layer that we created with these sort of paint streaks, make sure you're on the mask for it. Make sure you are on the mask and it's the darkest one selected. You should be able to then run your pen over these as well, and you'll see a lot more texture just pop into play a little bit more on top of those areas here. And just breaking them down, trying to create some interesting sort of variation, but most importantly, just a simple way of adding in some texture. Again, zoom out, you should just get a little bit of an eroded look in there. Now it's at this point where we can go ahead and separate our ocean here from where our sandy little beach is going to sit. So we can go ahead and open up our layers. We can collapse our foreground group down. You can, if you want to, simply tap on that and flatten it. We don't necessarily need to make any changes to that now. We're going to go ahead and we're going to go to this layer here that we created for this big block of brown at the bottom. We're going to go to our colors. We're going to go ahead and we're going to grab the top color here, the top left of the palette, and drag it into this space. So it'll go nice and yellow. What we can then do is we can go to our layers. We're going to go ahead and create a new layer. For a moment, we're going to tap on it and clipping mask it to it, so we can just see the work that we're doing. And we're going to go to our colors. We're going to grab the brown again, though, the top of the third column. Your brush wants to be set to the option of calligraphy in the monoline brush. Size doesn't really matter. It's totally up to you what sort of size you want to go for, but we're going to be kind of intricate here. We're going to run a bit of a diagonal line that's going to go across our design. So it's almost going to go like here in a bit of a straight line. So if you want to, just simply draw in a line, drag the color into the top section, and then adjust the line. It's totally up to you, whatever's easiest. I'm going to start just below this formation over here, and I'm just going to create like a sort of less even sort of diagonal line across our screen here, and then drag and drop the color into the top space. So what you've just filled in there is where your ocean is going to be. What we're then going to go ahead and do is we will add in the reflection that's going to sit below. But before we do, we need to isolate this brown area now as its own shape in its own space. So what we're going to do is we're going to tap on this layer here for the big block of yellow that you created and go to the option of select. So now we've selected that. Make sure you tap on color fill and turn it off. So now all we want is that selection of that area. If we go to the option of invert, we'll select everything but that area, which now gives us a box, the perfect shape that if we go to the brown layer here, and we tap on it and we use the option of clear, we're going to clear everything else that is outside of the yellow box on that layer of brown. I know the logic is hard to sort of explain, but it makes total sense. We've just chopped off the big top area here. And if I now tap on this layer and unclip it, notice how it looks like it's exactly perfect, because it is. It matches up perfectly to the horizon line of that layer that we created. So now with that done, we've got the shapes here down here that we can then work with. Now, the first thing I want to go ahead and do is reflect our whole design in this area here of our sandy beach below. So what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to turn off these two layers, the brown and the yellow there. We're going to go ahead though, and where the yellow block is here, we're going to create a new layer. We're going to tap on it and clipping mask it to the yellow block. We'll swipe from left to right on both for a moment, and we'll group them together, and we'll rename the group and we'll call it sand. And then we'll get rid of our keyboard. On this empty layer here, we're going to go ahead and we're going to swipe down with 3 fingers on the screen and copy everything we can see. So copy all. We're then going to go ahead and swipe down with 3 fingers and go to the option of paste. We won't see any visual change other than this big square layer that's now been dropped in. If you go to your layers, you'll see that your entire design has been copied and pasted onto one layer. Now, if we go ahead and we turn on the yellow block underneath, and we can turn on our brown sort of shape there for what will be our ocean. This layer here that's been pasted in, if we grab our cursor, we go ahead and go to the option of flip vertical, and we drag that down. We can now create the reflection that we need. So as long as you've got snapping in the bottom left turned on, you should get an orange line you can see there in the middle of my screen, which lets me know I've moved perfectly up against the edge of the canvas, both on each side, which means that I'm obviously perfectly in the center of our design. And you can move this up a little bit. It doesn't have to be sort of point to point perfect. I kind of like it when it's always like a point or two a little bit higher. And I can go ahead and tap on my cursor when I'm done. And I've got my lovely reflection that's going to sit in the sand. But at the minute, it's obviously too perfect. So let's go ahead first of all and go to our adjustments. Let's go to motion blur. If we push from left to right, so we tap on the screen and push to the right hand side, and we go up to around about 20 to 25%, you're going to end up with a lovely soft sort of blend out here, which is my impression of the sand just being a little bit wet, and then you get that kind of reflection, but it's not too perfect. Now, if you go to 22%, for example, and then go up to your layers, if we then swipe that layer to the left and we duplicate it, if we go ahead and we tap on the one above and we bring the opacity down to around about sort of 20%, and then change the blend mode here to the option of add, you should then underneath get a much brighter glow happening in your sand. Now, this particular point will vary person to person because of how yellow you maybe made this area up here. I can see mine's quite yellow down here. So what I might need to go ahead and do, for example, is just tap on this and bring the opacity down even lower, but I still want that glowy kind of effect. So I'm going to go up to about sort of 14, 15% there, just to get a little bit more of a brighter glow down here. So now we've got our reflection there of our sort of areas of stone. Let's go ahead and add in the sandy areas. They're going to sit here as well. Now they're going to sit above the sand, and they're also going to sit above the water. So let's rename this brown area up here. Let's rename that water for a moment. We're going to go ahead and we're going to create 2 new layers above the water and swipe from left to right on both and group them together. We'll just rename this and we will call it sand hills. They're only going to be small little mounds, but we'll call them hills. And then we're going to go ahead and go to the bottom layer out of the 2. We're going to go to our colors. We're going to go ahead and grab this color here, first of all, the top left of the palette. We're going to go to our brush and again go back into artistic and then sassafras brush. I'm going to bring the opacity up a tiny bit, up to about 80% here. And I'm going to set the brush size to something a little bit smaller that I can control, so about 6%. Now, what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to draw in a mound. I'm going to draw it in quite quickly for you. That's going to sort of sit here on the left-hand side. Now, one thing I also want to go ahead and do is make sure that this sand sits in front of this layer here. So in a moment, we'll cut away at the bottom of this layer here. I want to kind of just layer the whole sort of environment on top of itself. Now, it's going to run to around about this point here, so the halfway point of our design. So you can go ahead and just run your pen along here, run it underneath that kind of stony area, which we'll chop away into shortly. So I'm going above and higher than the edge of our water here. Again, trying to show that this area is in front, a little bit closer towards us. And we're just going to bring a little streak down here, down towards that midpoint. I'm pressing really light because my pressure is nice and light. I can build up some nice texture in here. I can build up some little mounds here and there, and I can just create little curves. Now, I'm probably going to make the brush size a little bit bigger, about 12% here, just to block this in a tiny bit more. Get that in, and then I'm going to keep coming a little bit further down. Make sure my pressure gets nice and light. We're bringing that down, and we're just creating a bank that's eventually going to kind of run into just the wet sand that you can see below. I'm just going to block this in. I want a little bit of the layered effect in here. I don't want this area over here to be too perfect. That's why we've got the opacity a little bit lower, so we can just create this kind of nice area of sort of texture without it sort of being too solid. And then create these like really light streaks here. You may need to bring your brush size down to say 6% or even lower, and just create some really nice sort of streaks off from this big sort of mound here that just shows a little bit of the sand sticking up enough that it's nice and yellow and it doesn't sort of blend in too much with the wet sand down here. So I'm just going to try and make that a little bit uneven. Now, don't worry too much necessarily down here if you haven't made that too perfect, because we're going to end up erasing into this in a moment anyway, of course, using again another little mask trick. So we're going to go ahead and block this in on the top edge, making sure just the top edge is nice and solid. I'm going to block this in back there too. Blocking that in. Lovely stuff. And then this area here is raised up. Now, as I mentioned before, we're going to go ahead and go into our foreground group. It doesn't matter if you've blended it all into one layer, as long as on your layer, if you've got one layer, that's fine. Just go ahead and tap on it and add a mask to it. If you've got multiple layers like I do, just add it to this left shape over here. And on that mask up here, we're going to go ahead and make sure our color is set to black. Our brush, we can set it to the same one, the sassafras, but let's bring the opacity back up to 100%. And let's just go ahead and just bring the sand over a little bit. Let's bring that to about 2%. I'm going to press really, really firm. And I want to bring that sand over the top of here. So hopefully what that does is that pushes that a little bit further backwards in our design and brings the hill forward. Now, once you've got your sort of mound of sand over here, we'll go back down to that layer. We're going to first of all tap on that layer and we're going to alpha lock it, so we can't paint outside of it. We're going to go to our colors and we're going to grab the middle color in the first column. Brush still wants to be the sassafras, and we'll set the size to maybe around about 15%, and we'll bring the opacity back down to the 64. Just around the base here where the sand gets closer towards the reflection, we're going to darken it up so it shows the wet sand against the dry sand at the top up here. So it's a very subtle change in color. It's a little bit of a darker yellow just down here. And you can blend that up, but press quite firm down here on the end of some of your streaks and leave this area up here. Now what we're then going to go ahead and do is we're going to swipe this layer to the left and duplicate it, tap on it and clip it to itself. We're going to go ahead and tap on this layer and change the blend mode to the option of screen, and you'll see it get really bright. Again, we're going to add a mask to this, so we'll tap on it and add a mask. We're going to go ahead and make sure we're on the mask. Our color is set to black and our brush is set to, let's go to airbrushing in the soft brush. If we set the brush size to around about sort of 6%, I want to get rid of all of this dark tone here at the bottom. And I'm just going to blend out all of this dark tone at the bottom here, blending it up. And I want to just leave like a patch of light sand on the very top there. And we can also go ahead and take it away from the top as well. So we just kind of want to leave like a little light patch here. So we just end up with a bit of a gradient of color. We've got a nice, lovely sandy peak up there. Now at this point, all your line work doesn't really blend into the ground too well. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back down to that layer, to the original one, tap on it, and of course add a mask to this one too. We're then going to make sure again we're on the mask, color is set to black. But we're going to go ahead and we're going to use the dust brush. So for you, it'll be set under imported. It's an additional brush that you're going to need for today. And for me, it's in a different folder. It's under textures and the dust brush. I'm going to set the size to around about 12% here. And we're going to go ahead and mask out the bottom of here, adding in a nice grainy effect on the bottom edge of this sand. And you should get this nice little speckled look to it. You can drag it up a tiny bit if you want to, but ultimately we just want to kind of just feather out this sort of sand and sort of blend it out into the wet area here. So you just should then start to see this sort of fade out effect happening at the bottom. So now hopefully that sand looks like it just raises itself up. If you want to, you could really redefine this shape as well. You could really sort of take away a little bit of this edge here and point it downwards a little bit. So just leaving a little bit of what will be the ocean behind it. So you've got one mound there on the left-hand side. We can go ahead and repeat that on the right-hand side, except this one's got a little bit less amount of sort of steps to it. So we're going to go ahead and use the empty layer that's in this sand hills group. We're going to go to our colors and we're going to grab the color here in the bottom left of the palette. We'll go back to our brush and go back again to artistic and the sassafras. We'll set the brush size opacity, shall I say, to 80%. The size can be, let's go to about 12%. And then down here in the bottom right, we're going to draw in another area of brown that's going to essentially run in this area here. So it's going to come from this top right corner-ish and just slightly beyond the halfway point. So you can go ahead and really block it in down here. You can really press quite firm and get like a bit of a bank shape going on. And then bring that down. And then once you start to think about, have I sort of covered enough space? So roughly around about here looks pretty good. We can drop the brush size down to about 6% now and start to sort of create those similar kind of streak effects here where the sand just sort of blends into the wet area here down at the bottom. We don't want it too streaky, of course. So if you see like a few sort of streaks just matching up to each other a little bit, just get in there and just try and sort of block them in, take away a little bit of the color. You can always run a line as well through these brighter areas as well, just to break down your reflection from above, and wiggle your pen if you want to create like a little bit less of a perfect mound. It's totally up to you. I'm going to block this in right at the very bottom. I'm going to get rid of a little bit of this space here. And then what you can also go ahead and do, you can tap on this layer and alpha lock it as well. We'll go to our colors and grab the bottom of the second column. And then where the sand gets towards the wet area here, you can just overlap this here with this lighter brown, just wetting the sand hopefully a little bit down here and blend that over the top of some of that brown area. You can make the brush size a little bit bigger if you want to, just create a bit more of a blend out here and really blend that round. And hopefully then your sand just looks a little bit more wet as it makes its way closer towards. I would probably go ahead, to be honest with you, and then switch my color back to this color here, the base color for this area, and blend that back in and push it a little bit closer towards the edge, just leaving the edge of this bank over here, like the wetter sand. I want to really have this raised up. And just like before, we'll go ahead and we'll tap on this layer. We'll add a mask to it. Make sure again you're on the mask and your color set to black. We're going to go to our brush library again. For you, it would be under imported. For me, it's under my other textures section, but we're going to use the dust brush. Maximum opacity, size can be something around about maybe 9%. And again, just sort of blend over the top of this. So just blending it out a little bit, creating some grains in there if you want to as well. You can maybe grain out a little bit here at the bottom, just creating some variation in the mound. But as long as you get that kind of lovely speckled effect, you should then have this lovely blend out and this lovely little gap here for your reflection to sit in. Now let's go ahead and finish the water, because that, of course, now at this point is the one element that's looking a little bit funny. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to collapse our sand hills down. You can tap on that if you want to and flatten it. It's totally up to you. We've got the water group here. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to tap on it and I'm going to alpha lock it first of all. We're going to go ahead and go to our colors. And we've got a couple of different colors here that we're going to try and blend in. We're going to kind of have a 3 blend here. So I'm going to first of all grab a color here that's going to match up to our sea and sand area here. So we're going to go ahead and grab the middle color here in the 4th column. Your brush wants to be back to the one that we've been using predominantly, which is going to be artistic and the sassafras. Let's set the opacity to 64%, size to about sort of 14. And then on the end down here of the water, we're going to blend this in. We're just going to create like random streaks that run through. And then what we're going to do is we're going to try and leave over here on the right hand side a little bit darker, because the water is going to end up being a bit darker, because we're going to end up with a really big shadow from our little bit of stone there. So I'm just blending in this bit of yellow here to try and sort of bring through a little bit of the yellow of the sand. But having some darker spots, especially around the base of some of your land there, is going to look great. If we then go to our colors though, and we grab this color here, it is the middle of the 6th column. And we go all the way along our horizon, pressing really firm, and then streaking this in and coming to meet the browns and the yellows. You can blend that in, create a bit of a lovely green tone as they layer themselves on top of each other. But especially at the back there, press really, really firm along your horizon. You know, you could even go back in, of course, and bring your opacity up to 100%. but just making sure that you do add in a lovely amount of blue back there and blend it in here, blend it in some of the gaps at random, bring in a little bit of blue here and there, a couple of streaks maybe a little bit closer towards us. The ocean's going to have so many random tones in it that if you can do that effectively, you're just going to end up building a lot of different hues in there. So I've got this lovely blue color happening. Let's then go ahead and move on to some details that are going to sit on top. So let's go to our layers. Let's create a new layer. Let's swipe from left to right on both of these and group them together. I'll collapse my foreground. That's done as well. And we're going to rename this group and we'll call it Ocean. And we're going to grab the layer here above. We're going to go to our colors and grab the top color here in the 6th column. Opacity 65%, same brush. We're going to set the brush size probably to about sort of 65%, and we're going to draw in some waves here. Now in the distance, they just need to be as simple as some streaks along the ocean here. So blending in some little streaks here, random patches of slightly brighter tones going to look great. Again, remembering this, the whole entire scene is bathed in sunlight. So what we need to go ahead and do is just try and keep that within the boundaries though of the ocean. So as you make your way a little bit further up, just try and sort of bear that in mind as you make your way just slightly towards that horizon line. If you go over ever so slightly, it's not actually a crime, to be honest with you. You'll be fine. Just blend this in here. Blending that in. And then as we start to get a little bit closer, I want you in this area here to start, as your waves come in, just maybe give them a little wiggle here. Just a little squiggle, a little wiggle. Just a little something just happening in here, a little bit of a current, and seeing that tide come in. I'm just going to blend over the top of that again, just a few more streaks. We can always take them down a few notches as well if we need to. It's a lovely little texture like this. And as we make our way into here, we're going to squiggle our pen along and create wave and wave and wave after wave. So we're just going to wiggle in some color here. Back here, you do want to have some smaller ones. You don't want to go too big too early here. So maybe you could bring the brush size down to about sort of 2 to 3% and just squiggle in some slightly smaller lines or smaller patches in here. They don't need to be sort of massive long lines every time. They can be little dashes. I'm going to squiggle my pen along and raise it up a little bit. So as they get a little bit closer, you can create slightly higher waves. I'm using a varying amount of pressure as well. Now, what I recommend you do is once you get to this sort of point here, start on the edge of the water. So come down here, wiggle your pen along the water's edge, try and take away a little bit of that gap. And then what you want to do is you want to kind of like identify a patch of area here that you can add some white to. Then leave a gap for a moment and then create your next sort of almost like U shape here along the water's edge. So you can just wiggle your pen along here, along the line that we created, and then just kind of roll that backwards a little bit. And then you can just blend on the top of that, add in a bit more color, fade that round. Over here, just because it's in the shade doesn't mean it doesn't get any of these lighter tones. So let's go ahead and add in like a wave that's sort of pointing a little bit over towards the right hand side. So I'm just undoing that because I want to just redo the color, pointing my pen down a little bit. I'm going to kind of create like a bit of a curve where I'm imagining it's coming round here and then it's being pushed over towards this right hand side. You can have a contrasting line or two though that point off to the opposite side. That's perfectly okay. And then in behind, again, just adding in little sort of streaks of the white tone on here will look great. Streaking that in behind. We are going to eventually end up smudging this as well. So adding in some blending. So we just want to add in a few more sort of streaky areas in behind in this area. And then also on these lines, of course, you can create additional little lines running in behind. Depends on how sort of dense you want to make sort of the current coming in and the little tide that's going to be coming in here, and just how dense do you want to make all the little wave lines. How rough of a day is it essentially? So we can then go along here. We can make sure we go all the way down and into this kind of gap in here and create little sort of wave lines in here. You can build one off of the side of this sort of rocky area here as well, like one like here. Streak that in, keep zooming out. I can see I've got a lovely varying amount of pressure, which looks great. Now you don't have to add in a lot of these lines. What you then want to go ahead and do is start to create like swooping lines backwards off of them. So can you create like little light pressured, smooth lines, just bringing their way inwards. And a little bit horizontal as well. So you can just get in here and create some horizontal lines in here to create the white top of the water. So we want to keep taking a look at the work we've done. Can we just keep streaking on top? We do want to get rid of a lot of the color in here. Like eventually this will all be quite a white area. So what we're going to do is just take away a few of these. Now, what I imagine here is that these sort of darker spots in the wave, the more colorful areas, they are areas of the sort of where you can see a wave rise up and you get to see all the lovely color inside it. So if you want to leave them, you can leave the color here of some of these waves. Always zoom out, take a look at the scale of it, make sure you're happy with how much color you're adding in. Right at the front down here definitely needs to be nice and white, and you definitely want to sort of blend over the top of the line of our land here. So where that color in the background there comes to an end. If though you feel like I don't want to add any in this gap, in a minute we can always go ahead and erase it from the shape that sits underneath. So I'm going to squiggle my pen along here, squiggle in my pen a little bit more, squiggling that in there, creating lots and lots of areas of the white that's going to sit on top. So this part of the tutorial is just going to take a little bit of time because waves are interesting. There's so much going on that you kind of want to just make sure you spend some time really blocking them in and blocking in the sort of the movement of everything. How's the whole design flowing? What's the flow of the water? What direction is it going in? And that takes a little bit of time to really make it look quite convincing. Adding in some extra tones here. And we've obviously got our land there in the back, so I don't want you to run too close up towards that, because if we get too close, we're going to end up creating a little bit too much of a solid line between these two shapes. So I'm going to really bring in another big kind of curling wave there, which looks fantastic. What else can we do? Let's take a look for another one and kind of wiggle my pen along here. Because what I've done is I've used this phrase quite a lot recently. I've set the blueprint of these waves by drawing in all these little streaks, and now I'm building on top of them and just creating more and more sort of mini areas of detail in there. Let's just continue streaking that in a little bit in the gaps. I want, again, a general sort of coverage of the white. I'm pressing so light, so that's why it's not really coming out too much on camera. Now, I don't want you to press too firm in a sense for adding in white highlights, because in a moment we're going to create a separate layer and make that the add layer, and then we can really add in some lovely white spots on top of some of these waves. And we might almost be at that point. But before we do, let's go ahead and touch up the shape that sits underneath. So if we go to our layers and we go down to this water shape here, tap on it and add a mask to it. Making sure you're on the mask. Let's go ahead and set the opacity probably to 100%. Let's set the size to 6, that's fine. Go along the edge here of your solid shape. So for example, I've got a line here. It's going to lightly blend over the top. Because this brush is still pressure sensitive, I can decide how much pressure I want to spend in this area. Make my way along here and just sort of fading out the edge of it in this gap here, which will also help you now redefine the shape of the land as well. And then back there, I'm going to get rid of a few of those darker spots underneath there, which I've actually revealed the darker tone, so I'll leave it as it is. That's fine. So we're going to go ahead and go to our layers now and create another new layer. Let's change the blend mode from normal to the option of add. Bring that sassafras brush back down to 65%, and the size is 6%. And now at this point, you can take a look at your waves, and can you now brighten up on top of some of them with some brighter tone? You may need to go ahead and adjust this layer, and I'm going to go ahead and tap on this layer and bring the opacity down to 55%. That way, even if we press really firm, our waves don't get too bright and white. And you want to just add in some lighting on top of these waves and top of these areas here. And can you even just streak in a couple of brighter spots back here in your distant ocean? Can we just streak some in along here, really brightening up that area? That's perfectly fine to add in a good chunk of color in there. We can streak in some more areas of color as well, just to really make sure that that back area's got some lovely bright sunlight just bathing on it. And then we're going to take a look at our waves again. Can we wiggle in our pen on top of some of them, adding in some specks of whiter, brighter tone in there. Feel free though to bring the brush size down to like a 3% if you want to get really granular with the detail, and spend some time sort of really trying to work this in. In a moment, we'll be moving on to sort of the blending of this add layer and the previous layer. So what you add in now is not technically final. You can, there is going to be some time in a moment to adjust them, but these little specks, and especially along the water's edge here, you can go ahead and add in some lovely white patches along here. Not too consistent. And then if you've got like a wave that you can see, like the curve of a wave, you will just want to add it to the top edge where the sun's probably just crashing onto the top of it. Here, this is just around the corner, so I'm just going to go ahead and add in some white light on it because it's coming from behind that corner that I can get away with adding it. You don't want to add any down here, for example, because the water has completely gone and sort of rested in the shadow area here. So taking a look at that, that looks pretty sweet. I'm happy with how they look, but let's go ahead and break them down a little bit. Let's go to our smudge tool. Let's go ahead and tap on the smudge tool and again use the same brush. If you feel uncomfortable with this brush, by the way, use something like soft airbrush under airbrushing. I'm going to set the opacity to 80%. I'm going to bring the size to, let's go 3%. And then we're going to go ahead and grab our waves here, the brightest areas of them, and just blend in and take away maybe a little bit of that brighter spot or expand it. So if you smudge inwards, so like I'm going from here up and into the white area, you'll end up taking away. If you go ahead and start on the white and then smudge across, you're of course pushing that highlight around and expanding it a little bit. So I'm going to push that along that top edge. I'm going to push that along here. Down here, for example, along the water's edge, that can definitely be broken down a lot. I'm going to push that along down here. So sometimes you have to press a couple of times with this brush. And then I can smudge inwards as well and really take away some of the brightest edge. I can push that around there a little bit. And we just want to take a look, see what areas. In some areas, you may also want to go ahead and grab your eraser and just simply get rid of them. You know, like here, I could take away a little bit of color there because we don't want every single area here to be sort of bathed with that slightly brighter, whiter look to it. So try and sort of take out and have less is more, as I always say. So let's add in a little bit of color here, sort of smudging them around in a circle. And I'm going to push them along. I'm going to bring these ones along here just a little bit. And I'll push all of these little specks that I created backwards. So I'm pushing them backwards, trying to create like a really streaky effect. I'm just pushing them backwards, back along our shore. Then let's go ahead and go back down to the layer underneath, so the original wave layer. And we'll repeat. We'll go back to our smudge tool. And we're going to get in here now and start to smudge out a few of these lines here. So what you can do is you can take a look for your big waves here. Do you want to kind of smudge this down and sort of fade it along a little bit? So just really soften it up, or do you want to leave it nice and sort of cloud-like, nice and fluffy? I want to leave this little bit underneath. That looks fantastic. So I'm going to leave that as it is. I'm going to streak these backwards, streaking them along, just smudging them out, trying to sort of create a bit more of a fade and a blend and a bit of a softer, more milky look to them, rather than too much of that initial texture. Pushing them backwards every single time. And I'm pushing it in the direction that they are coming in. So we can push them backwards. You're guiding the user's eye as well, who's looking at this design. You know, you can smudge a wave down in the opposite direction. That's fine. It shows it's coming this way. The wave's curling back up on itself. And we'll go in again for another crashing wave. Lovely stuff. And again, that should hopefully make things look a little bit more milky. You'll get rid of some of these lines here. These ones are a little bit too texturized for me. You can again smudge them in all sorts of different directions, but the angle is important. Pushing it in the angle of the sort of where you want people to look, which is that way. And you can push some of these horizontal lines forward and backwards. We're just trying to, again, create that really milky look to it. We've got this wonderful milky kind of look down here for the reflection. We can make sure we kind of keep that going a little bit. Keep the aesthetic going. And back here as well, smudge out some of these lines. Let's really smudge out some of these. Pushing them around a little bit. Now at the minute, this area of land here is looking a bit too solid, so we'll get back in there in a moment and fix that too. Once we've done our smudging, let's take a look. Let's take a look at the effect. I think that's looking pretty sweet. The only thing I'm going to do is make an exception to the lighting. So I'm going to go back up to the lighting. I'm going to grab my eraser. I'm going to tap on it and use the airbrushing and the soft brush. The only thing I'm going to do, and you don't have to do this if you're happy, is I'm going to take away a few of these brighter spots here. I just want to break down them. They're looking a bit too consistent for me. I want the waves when they're nice and high to get that lovely clipped area of lighting coming from above and from our sunlight. So just breaking them down a little bit. We don't need to overdo it in any way. Now let's go ahead and add in some shadows that are going to sit in this space over here. So we're going to go ahead and go above our two areas of the wave so we created and create a new layer. We're going to tap on it and change the blend mode of it. We're going to change it to the option of soft light. We're going to go to our colors. We're going to go ahead and grab this color here, the top of the second column. Your brush wants to be set to the option of airbrushing and the soft brush. We're going to go ahead and set our brush size to something small that we can control, around about sort of 4%. And then back down here in behind like this area here, we're going to go left to right and we're going to really shadow this in behind here. So we're going to get quite brave now with adding in some dark shadows. So we're just pushing the darkness around in this space. We're going to take a look over here as well. We're going to add in a bit of darkness just behind and around the base of our land. So I'm just going to set the brush size to about 3% and I'm just going to darken up along the edge of the water there just a little bit and bring that down even smaller, down to about 2%, and just add some on the base of the land there just to really darken them up a tiny bit. We want that real strong contrast in the lighting. We can then go ahead and move on into adding some details in the air so we can collapse our ocean down. I'm not going to flatten mine because I think I've got a change that I want to do towards the end. I'm going to go ahead and go above our foreground and we'll create a new layer. We'll go ahead and go to our colors and we'll just simply go ahead and we'll grab this color here, the top of the second column from the right. And I'm going to go up to my brush and I'm going to change it. I'm going to go to inking and the dry ink. I've got a maximum opacity and I've got a size currently set to about 10%. And we just want to create some birds in here. Now, birds are really straightforward. You can create an M shape and then in the middle, make them a little bit bigger. So you can create like a bit of an M here, for example. They don't have to be perfect, and then just sort of widen up the body a tiny bit. They just need to be as simple as that. But you can then create the other variations where their wings are above. So you just create a V shape with like these middle pivots in the middle here. So you create like up and then another angle. So they've got an angle in the middle of the V, and then you sort of widen up the body. So you then create sort of variations in the birds, in the sort of how much their wingspan is open at the time. I want you to create sort of varying sizes of the birds as well, just a few that are a little bit smaller, a little bit further away, and creating them M shape every time. They don't need to be perfect. In a moment, they're going to get blended into the sky as well. So I'm going to create like another one down here. It's hanging a little bit lower. I'll go ahead and I'll also create, I love the V ones. I think they look really cool. Create another one here and then a little bit more of a body on this one potentially. Push out a bit more on there, a bit more detail potentially on these ones. A little bit closer. So we've got those lovely seagulls potentially, and then another one up here. Another one up there. And let's go ahead and create another one in that space. Just a real simple V shape potentially in there. Just a few little birds in the sky, and we're going to go ahead and change the blend mode of it. We're going to tap on it and change it to the option of soft light as well, which will hopefully just blend it into the environment a little bit more. They're there, but they're up in the sky, so we can't really make out the silhouette of them too well. It's up to you. You can leave it as normal. You could set it as soft light and maybe duplicate it if you want and just bring them out a little bit more. I'm going to bring out them a little bit more, but bring the other one down to 50%. So I've got like 150% here. It just gives me a little bit more of them. I'm then going to go ahead and add in the lighting. We're going to create two new layers for that and swipe from left to right on both and group them together and rename this lighting. And this is very typical of a lot of my tutorials. We're going to go ahead and go to the bottom layer out the two. We're going to go to our colors and we're going to go ahead and grab this color here, the top of the fifth column there. We're going to go to our brush. We're going to go to airbrushing and the soft brush. And set it to a fairly large size, around about 25%. And the layer wants to be set to the option as well of soft light. Now what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to brighten up the top right corner. The sun is going to be right here on the top of this rock. So we're going to go round in a circle here and blend in a nice large amount of this color here up in the sky, making it nice and yellow, nice and bright. And then we'll go ahead and create a, well, using the other layer in here, should I say, change the blend mode of it from normal to the option of add. I'm going to bring that brush size down to around about sort of 9 or 10% so we can control the lighting. And we're going to go round in a circle just here, just behind this stone here, and go round over the top of it. Will look great because you'll get these brown hues come in. And we add layer effects, so we're just going to tap and tap and tap and create a lovely bright sun up there in the top right of our design. Now the only change I mentioned roughly a second ago is I'm going to go ahead and go back into my ocean layer. I'm going to go ahead and grab this layer here that's got all the main sort of white area. I'm going to swipe it to the left and duplicate it. I want that water to be a lot whiter than it was. It wasn't milky enough in any way. It was way too sort of faded for me. Now, if you're going to do the same, feel free to just do what I normally do is when you duplicate it, just pick how much extra you want of it. So I've duplicated it and I can increase the opacity here to something a little bit higher to around about maybe 80% if I just want to get a little bit more of that milkiness on the water. And another thing I'm going to go ahead and do is this area here of the land. I'm going to go ahead and go into the foreground. Again, take a look at what I'm doing now and just see if you need to make those tweaks. Sometimes they're specific to me potentially, but on the mask here, I'm going to go ahead and make sure my color is set to black. I'm going to go to my brush. I'm going to go to the soft air brush. I'm going to make sure it's nice and small, around about sort of 2%. And just here on the edge of the land, I'm just going to fade that out a little bit and just fade it away. I want to get rid of the solid line, and I don't want you to be able to see where that land fades into the water and where the water starts and where the land starts. I want that nice faded effect. And another tweak I'm going to make is I just want to move this sandy hill. So I'm going to go back into the sandy hill group, and I've selected both of these layers over here on the left hand side and the masks as well. I'm going to grab my cursor. I'm just going to move that up a little bit higher, up to here. I think we can probably go a tiny bit lower. Tap on our cursor when we're done. And then again, I just need to tweak the bottom of the foreground. So I'm going to go back up into the foreground and the mask for this area of the rock over here. I'm going to make sure I'm on the mask. My brush is set to something like monoline brush and my color is set to black, just so I can, again, just chop out the bottom of this here and then just create that nice separation between them. I'm using the monoline though this time. It's a little bit more defined, and hopefully that should then raise that again even further just in front of it. And while I'm here in the sandy hills, I'm going to make sure I'm on the base layer for this area and I'm on the mask for it. I'll switch my brush back to the dust brush, and I'm just going to go ahead and just take away a little bit more of this, just blending it out a tiny bit more, just leaving a bit of a hill on that left hand side, leaving a nice channel in the middle for my reflection from above. And if we go ahead and we go up to our actions, we turn off our drawing guide, we pinch with 2 fingers and we go full screen with 4, we end up with today's finished design. So I hope you enjoyed today's tutorial. As always, make sure to tag me in your finished creations over on Instagram when you're done. And as always, come and share them with the Discord community that we have. We've got loads of people sharing their work daily, whether you're doing a tutorial of mine, anyone else that you follow on YouTube, or it's your own work. You can come and share your work with a wonderful Procreate community that's super positive and is a wonderful safe space for you to share your work. And make sure to, of course, subscribe for weekly Procreate tutorials. But if you want even more tutorials from me, you can come and join me over on Patreon, where I've been posting 3 exclusive tutorials every single month to my patrons, and the catalogue sits at nearly 100 at the time of recording. So if you want to get access to all of that content, hit the link in the description down below and come and show your support. And if you like this video here on YouTube, you'll probably like this one on the screen now. Thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you in the next one.